Okay, so I've been appraising for like 30 years. When you're good at nothing else, you just kind of do the same thing over and over again. And I will say the last 6 months probably has been the most challenging time in my entire career. Um, the reality is things have been so fluid. And, we started with this unknown factor called COVID-19. And I was sure that it was going to have an impact on our real estate market, but I just wasn't sure how and for how long. So I do want to go over some numbers with you to kind of let you have an understanding about what I'm seeing, and then we can talk about how I've dealt with it. And we'll go from there. And again, this is free form, so I don't have a presentation today. Sometimes I do. I didn't want to today. And so again, if you have questions, probably the chat's the best, but I don't mind if you unmute yourself. But to understand what we've gone through over the last 6 months, I just kind of went month by month, starting with March. And we have to kind of agree that sales is kind of a lagging figure, closings. So when I talk about March, to me, that's more February contracts. Life was way different in February. Can we just think about how wonderful February was for a little while? So in March, we had almost 8,900 closings. And this is the number that's interesting to me. The average price per square foot was $231 a foot. So then COVID hit, and we rolled into April, and April sales dropped to about 7,200. The average price per square foot dropped from 231 down to 212. That's an 8% 1 month decline in average sales price. I'd never seen that before. I've never seen it in my career. Then May came, and May, number of sales for May dropped again by a little bit, by 2%, down to about 7,000 sales. The average price per square foot, again, March was 231, April was 212, May was 178. That is a 16% decline in price per square foot in a 60-day, in 90 days. Again, I'd never seen that before. I thought the sky was completely falling. And I was on Zoom calls at that time saying, hey, long-term and medium-term, I think we're in good shape. I was pretty confident that COVID-19 wasn't going to do well in warm weather. I was wrong about that. And I figured eventually we would recover, but I just didn't know when. I kind of felt like we needed some sort of good news about the virus before we recovered, but I can't remember the last time I was that wrong. So June, sales went from May 7,000, June we were up to 9,700. You want to talk about a recovery? Average price per square foot in 1 month went from 178 up to 197. Just that I'd never seen drops like that in April and May. I'd never seen things rebound like that. And one of the terms I learned during this pandemic is the V recovery. You want to talk about a perfectly illustrated V recovery. We were going down like this and then up like this in a really short period of time. July, as most of you have lived through, was one of the most spectacular months we'd ever had at least in my 30 years. Number of sales went to like 10,500. That's crazy. Average price per square foot was somewhere around 190. It's an 8% increase in number of sales in just a month. I just pulled August numbers, and we're kind of right about where we were in June and July. 8,300 closings, down a little bit. End of the summer, maybe that's not so uncommon. Price per square foot, about 191. A lot of this is supply driven, as you all have experienced before. Like, how many times within the past few months have you written offers and there's multiple offers submitted? It's just the demand is high for the limited inventory. I think it's a credit to the agents for doing a really good job managing the supply. The supply did not really increase when we were seeing some COVID issues start to hit us in March. Okay, so now let's talk about that, how that impacts things from an appraisal perspective. I am now, so look, you all hear more recent data is the best, right? The most recent closings are the ones that probably should be most impactful in the valuation process. Um, this is now an extreme case of that. I work really hard to find June, July, and August sales. So I'm trying to keep within the last 90 days. And the reason is because if I start using May sales and April sales, let's just go back to what I was just telling you. The average
Oh
price
my
per square
God, is
foot
he
was
shitting
going
me?
down like this.
Boston, you
Um,
have PE. Get out here and pick this money up right now.
somebody needs to mute.
Look, pick it up. Hurry up.
So again, I'm using June,
You done?
July, and August data as best
Hey,
I
you need to be
can,
done.
so I can avoid having to really dive into what happened in April and May. Okay. I've said this before. I
Boston.
think most appraisers are like B and C students that kind of fell into this profession. And with what we've seen over the last 6 months, like I think you need Dean's List people. I really do. Like it is so hard to not just understand what's happened in this market, but to be able to deal with it and account for it. And that's the most important thing. If I'm using an April sale, I need to understand what's happened in this market over the last 4 or 5 months, and I need to account for it. Okay. And the way we account for it is with time adjustments. If the market's going up like this, and I'm using a sale from April, and we've gone up 2% a month over the last 90 days, then I should be making positive adjustments to that sale to account for the appreciation. The hard thing is I don't think most appraisers have spent the time to really look at what's happened since March. And therefore, I'm worried that the appraisals you're seeing aren't appropriately accounting for it. You don't have to worry if you're using June, July, and August sales because things have really kind of leveled off at a nice point over the last 3 months. But I think that we're going to talk in a little bit about what I think you should be bringing to your appraisal appointments. I think one of the things you should assume is that the appraiser might be a one-man shop who's just tunnel vision on appraisals every day, not looking at the big picture, not looking at what's happened in the market. And you might want to spend some extra time providing data that shows how the market's transitioned over the last 6 months. Again, it normally, I would say on most appraisals, you'll see comps over 3 months old. But with what we've seen recently, I'd be really concerned that the appraiser's not appropriately accounting for the old stuff. So that's kind of my take on the market. I do want to talk about how COVID-19 has impacted my profession in another way, because I think it's important for you to know this. There is now something called the COVID protocol in lending. And what that means is if the seller or the buyer or the agent or the appraiser communicates to the lender that, hey, I'm uncomfortable doing an interior inspection on this, or I'm uncomfortable having the appraiser come into my house, there is a process where they could submit, the lender could submit to have the interior inspection waived. I bring that to your attention because that's important here. It's important here because if your house is upgraded, remodeled, really well appointed, one of the nicer houses in the neighborhood, you don't want to waive that interior inspection. I fairly recently had a situation where I got a panic call from the agent. An appraisal came in low, like $25,000 low on like a $400,000 purchase. And the appraiser got a waiver, so they didn't have to do the inspection. And so they basically did a drive-by appraisal, never called the agents, and didn't get the square footage right. There was a basement, a basement and above grade got the square footage wrong. Didn't give credit for upgrades that were mentioned in the MLS listing. And the only way that transaction got done and closed was they appealed for a new appraiser and a new appraisal, and they got it. So be aware of that. If you represent the buyer, it's probably easier for you to tell the buyer, hey, make sure they don't waive the inspection on this one. I want them to do a full inspection. I want them to measure the house. That's another thing. If an appraiser gets a waiver on the inspection, then they're not measuring the house. And that could work one of two ways. It could be larger, and the appraisal is not going to reflect that, or it could be smaller and the buyer isn't aware that the house has been misrepresented and is smaller than what they thought. So if your house is the ugliest house in the neighborhood, an inspection might be inspection waiver might be perfect for you. But otherwise, I would be careful about that. I think that you're more likely to get an inaccurate appraisal if the inspection is not waived. If the inspection is waived. Any questions so far, Kelly, or should I keep moving on?
Yeah, it just popped up. How do you know if they waived the interior inspection?
Yeah, well, if nobody calls you, that means there's a good chance it was waived. So I do think that if you're the listing agent on this, it's going to take a little bit of communication between either you and the other agent, or you and the lender if you're getting the loan updates, where you say, please don't waive this inspection. Please don't. I want a full appraisal. And it's not a money saving thing, because most appraisers are charging the same amount whether they go inside or not. So it's not like somebody's saving money. I think sometimes appraisers are taking advantage of the circumstances to try and do less work. Here's something you should be aware of, though, that my industry, the appraisal industry, which is kind of governed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae has come out and said, just because an inspection's been waived doesn't mean that the appraiser doesn't have the same expectations. They are expected to ascertain the information about the subject property. They're expected to call agents. But I'm going to tell you on this call that that's not always happening, that there is a decent chance if the inspection's waived, the appraiser's not calling, not asking for an update list, not asking for upgrades, and that's problematic. So be aware of that, because that's something, and I think that the COVID protocol have been extended to the end of September. Don't quote me on that, but I think now that's all running through the end of September. Okay. So let's talk about the thing that I always love to talk about, is how you can be most effective at your job. And this isn't just a COVID conversation. This is just best practices in my mind. And I view your job as realtors as kind of putting your arms around your clients and being there every step of the way, walking through things, guiding them, representing your client's interest at any point in the transaction that you can. And I think the appraisal is a really important part of these transactions. Okay. So there are still too many agents that are saying, hey, the house is vacant on lockbox, go use your lockbox key, we're all good. I understand that. I understand that maybe there's been a narrative that's been told to you for a long time that says, hey, let the appraiser do their job, leave them alone. If they need comps, they'll call you. That's not necessarily true. I'm a strong believer of the fact that you have one time where you can be impactful, one time where you could really make a difference on the appraisal. And that one time's at the inspection. Okay. I've seen situations where they're like, hey, vacant on lockbox, go, here's your key. And I'm looking at the data, and our contract price is $20,000 higher than the next highest sale. And in my head, I'm like, why aren't they taking advantage of the opportunity to meet me and give me comps? You should do that. Don't be that realtor that's reactionary. Reactionary is the realtor that says, hey, it's on lockbox, use your key, have fun. I'm just going to call and yell at you when it comes in below the contract price. It's kind of too late then. I would assume not many of you have had good luck appealing appraisals. And the reason you don't have good luck appealing appraisals is because appraisers don't want to change their value. Okay. Once they've come in at a number, an underwriter's seen that number, the lender's seen that number, the appraisal management company, the appraisal desk, they've all seen that number. And when the appraiser later changes it because the appeal's really good and they made a mistake, it makes them a little less credible moving forward, because everyone on that transaction on the appraisal side has to at least ask themselves, is this a reliable partner to us? The appraiser made a mistake for whatever reason. They're changing their value. Anytime they change their value, it's kind of like they're admitting they made a mistake. And that's problematic sometimes. Like I've seen appraisers get kicked off approved appraiser lists and put on do not use lists because they've changed their value and the lender was no longer confident in their work. So I'm a big believer in being proactive, meeting the appraiser, bringing them a package of information, which we're going to talk about next, and really being involved start to finish on the appraisal process as best they can. Something else that is COVID related that I think kind of falls into best business practice for now is I know as an appraiser who today, I think I have 6 inspections. I had one this morning and 5 this afternoon. I know that to a degree, I'm putting my family at risk by going on these inspections. I no longer ask for COVID waivers. I'm just doing the inspections. But I really appreciate those realtors that are meeting me there, are getting the sellers out of the house, maybe treating their interaction with the appraiser like they would if they were showing a house and getting it ready for the showing. Get there early, tell the sellers to take a hike and take their sneezing kids with them, open doors, turn on lights. That puts me at less risk and makes me feel comfortable doing these inspections and then still going home to my family. So I really think that it's nice to start the professional interaction with the appraiser off on the right foot. I'm not going to tell you that that means the appraiser is going to come in $20,000 higher or $5,000 higher. But I think appraisers will appreciate it. And certainly that's not bad news. Do we have a question? I keep going, Kelly, or do you have any questions that you think are prudent to what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch. People, a lot with the waivers. Do lenders have to accept a request for a waiver? Or do
No, it's a good question. So we started when we were first in the middle of this, and I found out that this was an option. I had our assistant every time just say, hey, nothing particular to this transaction, but all things being equal, the appraiser would love not to have to go into this house because of COVID. And we got like 1 waiver and like 20 requests. So I stopped asking. So there's not a requirement. The cases you're most likely to get a waiver of the inspection is if the seller has COVID. If the seller says, hey, I'm not comfortable or I am high risk, those are circumstances where you might be more apt to get a waiver. But so no, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that often. I think the weird thing is I noticed a greater frequency from lender to lender. Like there's certain lenders that seem to think that deals will get done faster if they get the inspection waived. And so maybe they have a process where they have more luck getting those waivers. But I don't see them that often. And at this point, I don't want that. I don't want to do a bad job. I have the same liability, I think pretty much no matter what. And so I'd rather not be deprived of an inspection. And the other thing is if somebody appealed my appraisal and I didn't have the luxury of doing the full inspection and taking my own notes, then I just feel less comfortable with my opinion. So good question. Anything else, Kelly, before we move on?
The next one, I think you already answered it. Is the drive-by the choice of the lender or the appraiser?
Yeah. So again, the appraiser can ask for it. Appraiser is one of the parties that can ask for it. But ultimately, I think the lender is the one that makes the decision. I don't know. I think they appeal to like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, and if it fits within a certain parameter, then they'll let them do it.
Okay, makes sense. Someone said they heard of an appraiser lately entering a property without an appointment or contacting the listing agent. Is that grounds for appealing the value?
That's another really good question. I think it's incredibly unprofessional. What I don't know is if he's violating the terms of his lockbox Supra relationship. That I'm not sure, especially if he only has an affiliate key. I think he would have to call you, but if he's got the same key that you do, I guess he could do that. I would think it's grounds for appeal. I'm associated with a company called Apex, an appraisal management company called Apex. And if it gets to me, that that's happened, we'll call the appraiser and make them schedule, or we'll take them off the list. And we might still take them off the list because I just find it incredibly unprofessional, and it deprives you of the ability to be the best realtor you can be. Sounds so cliche, but that's exactly how I feel. So I can't stand that. I do think that if it were me and I had a deal in escrow and I was the listing agent and I was even remotely concerned about the appraisal, and lately, let's face it, we're all kind of at minimum remotely concerned about these appraisals, I would take the key out of the lockbox. Like I absolutely would preclude that appraiser from getting in there without me being there to meet them and give them information.
Good. Okay, just a couple more. Have you seen a trend where conventional appraisers are more aggressive on values than FHA?
No, I haven't seen that. I think that there's probably for a long time been this groundswell that VA appraisers are a little more conservative. I just think the average VA appraiser is like 96 years old, and so I think they tend to be a little more conservative. But I don't see that from FHA to conventional. Maybe appraisers are a little more worried that their appraisal will have some additional scrutiny on FHA. But I can't say that I see a trend where they're being more conservative that way. I think that, again, just talking values for a minute, it is a really hard time as an appraiser when you put the house on the market at $450,000 and you have 18 showings and 6 offers, and next thing you know, you're at $479,000. That's really hard from an appraisal perspective, because my guess is when you listed it, the market data supported about 450, and now we have to account for this crazy demand in a very short period of time. So it makes our job really tough. Okay, anything else, Kelly, or should I dive into what to bring to your inspection? You tell me.
However you think. We have probably 5 more questions.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay. How do appraisers handle comps for homes where the appraisal contingency was waived and the buyer came up with $20,000 cash when it didn't appraise?
Well, okay, so that's interesting. Generally speaking, once that closes, it becomes a great comp. And sometimes it's the only justification for the next contract price, but we usually aren't privy to that. We're usually not provided information that says, hey, this house that just closed a few weeks ago closed $20,000 higher than the appraisal because there was an appraisal waiver. I only look at it that, okay, if the market's going up that fast, that's a really recent comp, and that's kind of indicative of the crazy market that we're in. And I'll use it. And I think the neighbors should give you gifts, because that might be the only justification for the next new high contract.
Okay, good. Does it make a difference to an appraiser to show multiple offers that are higher than list price?
Yeah. So the last and main part of this conversation today is about what to bring with you to the appraisal to, again, do the best job for your client. And now more than ever, I think we're in a situation where you need to convey to the appraiser what's happened during the listing period. And I'll give you an example, or I'll tell you exactly what I would like to see. I would love to see a paragraph or a few sentences from the realtor that says, hey, this house went on the market, and most of it I can get from the listing, but a couple things I can't. This house went on the market on a Friday. We had 18 showings between Friday and Sunday, and we had 4 written offers and 1 verbal offer, and here's a copy of the 4 offers. Okay, that's important to me, because again, when I'm trying to make sense of this market and the current conditions and the climate that we've been put in over the last few months, that helps me show the demand, the current demand for a property at a certain price. And look, I understand if we get into a bidding war and things go up, 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 sometimes the winning bidder is the biggest loser because they're paying way too much for the house. Like, I fully understand that. And just because we have these multiple offers doesn't mean I'm going to be able to hit the contract price. But it's compelling information to me. and it's information that I'll use in my report and I'll use in my conclusion. And if I'm going to do that, it sometimes means I'm putting my neck on the line. Like I'm going to the absolute top of my comfort level based on the sales history, this listing history and the demand. Um, I'd like to see the offers. I really would. I've had realtors tell me for the last 15 years, oh, we've had multiple offers, multiple offers. And when I ask to see them, they're like, oh, they were verbal offers. Well, that's kind of not the same thing to me. So I would like to see in the package that you provide to me as the appraiser, page 1, 2, 3 of the contract and the signature page. 1 has a purchase price, 2, I think, has a personal property, 3 has the financing concessions, and then the last page, I'd like to see that there's actually a signature attached to it. And again, when I'm doing my conclusion, whatever I come up with, part of it's going to be the agent provided me with this information. There were this many showings. It was on the market for 2 days. 4 offers were submitted, and I saw all 4 offers, and I saw what they were at, and that's showing to me that the market has a positive reaction to a certain price. So that might be the difference between me getting to a contract price and not quite getting there, is that story. So I would like to see everyone pay attention to that and help the appraiser understand what's happened. Good questions, all of them.
Yeah. Also, does it make a difference to the appraiser to change the list price to the new higher price that we just accepted instead of leaving the price on the MLS at what we originally listed for?
No, I always thought that was kind of funny because I look at the listing history. Like I'm going to go and pull the listing history, and I catch you every time. I do. Like I know. Okay, here we're playing games with the list price. So I actually would rather you not do it. I'm not going to say it's unethical or dishonest but it does feel kind of weird to me. If you convey the information that I want, that's helpful to me, I don't really care that you change the list price. So I see a lot of agents do that. I really don't think you need to, and I would prefer that you don't. When I look at that closing, when I see the list price of 450 and I see the closing price of 460, I assume that means there were multiple offers submitted and that there was a lot of demand at the price. So I would rather you not change the list price. I'm glad I got to say that.
Good. He says, this is Richard, I think you hit the major impacts the market is going through. However, what about rate? Does this have a major impact in what is going to happen to the market when interest rates go up?
Yeah, so that's another really good question. And I am an apolitical human being, so I certainly don't want to have a political discussion, but I will say the federal government has done I think, a really good job propping up our industry by doing everything possible to drive rates down. And so, yeah, I think that has a lot to do with where we're at right now. In my personal opinion, again, I'm not boots on the ground like you guys are showing houses. I did get a feeling that August was less ridiculous than July and June. And I also noticed that interest rates creeped up a little bit as I think Fannie Mae added like some percentage points to a rate to kind of discourage or slow down refinances. So yeah, I think we're propped up a little bit. Again, I look at our market long term, and I always feel great about it. I feel like people will gravitate to a market like Phoenix. But again, I was really surprised at how fast we recovered. I knew there was some pent up demand, but I think interest rates helped. And I do think interest rates are going to keep creeping up. My gut feeling is they can't go down. So, right, they have to go up at some point. And yeah, I think that probably will have a little bit of an impact on us. Again, August was slower. Rates went up in August. And I think September probably will be a little bit slower still. So good question.
Yep. And that same person asked, do you think it's a good idea that realtors take an FHA class to better understand what needs to happen to a home with FHA?
I don't know. From an appraisal perspective, it's not nearly as different as it used to be. There were times in my career where FHA values would probably be lower The number of repairs required would be way up. But I think that FHA, VA, and conventional all kind of move towards the same model, which is if the appraiser thinks anything has an adverse health and safety impact, or something related to the structural soundness of the home, the appraiser is probably going to call for a repair, whether it be FHA, conventional, or VA. So no, I don't think there's a lot of differences. Chipping paint's an issue. FHA and VA have specific requirements of an appraiser when chipping paint exists, whereas a conventional appraiser has a little bit more latitude. We went through a period where the appraiser on an FHA was required to see if any appliances that were personal property were included in the transaction that they had to work. I'm not seeing appraisers check that stuff like they used to. It's just kind of crazy because if a washer and dryer is included in the transaction, the appraiser is not giving that any value because it's personal property, and we're not supposed to give personal property value. Yet we need to check and make sure it works. That's weird. So no, I don't necessarily think that you need a class for FHA. And by the way, Kelly, and maybe you can send out later, you can give my contact information. I'm happy to answer specific questions for realtors in my home group. You guys have been so great to me. So I try and make myself available as best I can for like really specific questions, just as I'm thinking about it.
And just to reiterate, we have lots of agents on here, not with my home group as well. So we did open to the whole industry. So
wow, that's great. Is that true?
Yeah.
Look at what you guys are givers.
Yes, we
you
are.
guys are givers. I thought this was only my home group.
No, we've been doing this for years. It's a very unique thing about us. So we would just want to educate everybody, right?
That's really cool.
Industry. What are your thoughts on trainees or assistants showing up to do the inspection instead of the appraiser?
Man, I don't need a PowerPoint because you guys are hitting my hot buttons for me. So one of the things that I recommend that you start making part of your practice in your interactions with appraisers is I would start interviewing your appraisers when they call you to get into your listing. And there's a few reasons for that. One is geographical competency. You need to make sure your appraiser understands your market. My appraisal today, this morning before I came here, was in Arcadia. And it's the example I use all the time. It was at like 58th Street, just south of Lafayette. If the appraiser doesn't know the Arcadian neighborhood, there's a real legitimate chance they might look south of the canal for comps. The second you go south of the canal in Arcadia, south of Indian School Road, property values drop significantly. And if the appraiser is not geographically competent, if they don't understand the location and neighborhood and the nuances of such in which they're appraising, then they run the risk of getting the value wrong. So that's one reason to interview the appraiser. The other thing is I would never let a trainee into one of my listings without their mentor being there with them. And just super quick, the way it works in my business is if you decide you want to be an appraiser, I don't know why any of you would want to be an appraiser, but you need, I think, your 150 hours of classroom work. And then you get your trainee certificate, and you need to go find a certified appraiser who will let you park under them. They will be your mentor. And the way it used to be is that mentor had to go with you go with the trainee on the inspections. I'm fine with that, because if the mentor is the one who's supposed to conclude the value, I want that mentor doing the inspection. I want him being involved in measuring the house. I want him walking through the rooms. I want him driving the comps. But now that mentor doesn't need to accompany the trainee anymore. So legitimately, what I think is probably happening in most scenarios is that trainees coming out there themselves, writing the entire report themselves, giving it to the mentor who may really look at it, may not, may just sign their name. I'm a failed realtor. I know how hard it is to get a transaction in escrow. And I would never just let a trainee come by themselves. I wouldn't let a licensed appraiser in either. Just so we know, there's certified general, which is more of a commercial designation, certified residential. 80% of my industry is one of those two designations, probably about 80%. The level below that is licensed. If a licensed appraiser is calling you, there's a good chance that lender is looking for the cheapest appraiser, not the best. I think it's really reasonable to demand not to work with the bottom 20% of our industry. So I think that's a really reasonable request. I want a certified appraiser. And then the level below that is trainee. I just talked about it. I would never trust a transaction with the trainee. I just remember what kind of appraiser I was 1 month into my business, 3 months into my business. Honestly, 2 years into this business, I was not a good appraiser at all. I just didn't know it. And then the other thing is now there's a chance that the appraiser that's calling you to get into your house is not an appraiser at all. It's just somebody who's coming out and taking pictures, uploading them to a system that are going to be delivered to an appraiser who never leaves his office. It's called a bifurcated appraisal. And again, if it's my transaction, I would ask them specifically, are you certified? You guys deserve that. It's super reasonable. Good. Another great question.
Yeah, this goes right with what you're talking about. This is two people's questions I'm just putting together. What type of questions can you ask the appraiser without insulting them to determine their competence? And if the appraiser you're interviewing doesn't appear to know the geographic area, can you request a different appraiser?
Yeah. Okay. So that's just an expansion of what I was talking about. So I will tell you, interviewing appraisers is not for the weak-hearted. It's really not. Like some appraisers are not very user-friendly, and they'll be offended that you're asking them for their credentials or whatever. So I think no matter what, I would like for you, the people on this call, to keep your level of professionalism way up here, no matter what happens. Okay. I think the right way to start the call is you're going to get the call from the appraiser asking you to set up the appraisal. And I think that something along the lines of, hey, you and I I don't think have ever worked together before. I mean, no offense. All I'm trying to do is protect my client's best interests. I have a couple questions for you. I hope you don't mind. Again, I think if they're professional, and you deserve a professional appraiser, if they're professional, they'll understand. There's nothing wrong with that. There really is nothing wrong with that. I don't mind it at all. I do not mind people interviewing me. And the question that I like the best, that I think gives you the most information you need, is just ask them, hey, can you give me an idea what geographical boundaries you're going to use to look for comps? Okay. I'm not a big fan of how many appraisals have you done in this neighborhood, because if they're not truthful, that's an easy one to kind of lie your way through. Your goal should be to have a really good comfort level that appraiser knows your neighborhood and knows it well enough that they can answer a question like that. You can ask them about school districts or whatever. But the geographical competency is an incredibly important aspect, because again, Arcadia is the best example. If you put a house in escrow in Arcadia, real Arcadia people, not the Arcadia you guys call everything else, but you want them to be able to say it's 44th Street to Camelback to 68th Street to the canal north of Indian School Road. And you want them to say that because you don't want them to go west of 44th Street and you don't want them to go south of the canal. It's a big deal. So that's a question I like. I would want to know that they're certified. And if they're not, or you're not happy with how the conversation goes, I can't stress this enough. Just politely get off the phone. You don't be confrontational. There's nothing good that comes out of that. Just say, hey, let me check the schedule. Let me check with my clients, or whatever you need to do. And then what you have to do next is get on the phone with the decision makers in the appraisal process, in the appraiser selection process. At every lender, it's going to be one of two entities. It should either be an appraisal desk, or it should be outsourced to an appraisal management company. Your goal should get to one of those places. Some lenders have an appraisal desk and an appraisal management company they use, but you got to get on the phone with them. And the term that's really important is geographical competency. I, as an owner of an appraisal management company, have a federal obligation to give you a geographically competent appraiser. So when you call me up and say, hey, the appraiser couldn't answer any questions about my location, they didn't understand the nuances of this neighborhood at all, I should take that really seriously. And I think in most cases, 80, 90% of the time, if it's even a decent lender or appraisal management company, they'll reassign that to someone else. Okay. And that's what you want. You don't want to go down the road with somebody who doesn't know your neighborhood, who didn't treat you professionally, who couldn't answer any questions for you, because your transaction's at risk then. So I say be non-confrontational, because if it's that 1 out of 10 scenarios where the lender's not willing to pull an appraiser off a job, some of these big banks takes more work, so they don't want to do it. You weren't confrontational with them to the point that when you answer the door to meet them, that you should feel super uncomfortable about it. Okay, so I think that's the right approach to it. If you're happy with how the call goes, let them in. If you represent the buyer, it's a little more difficult, because the natural progression is for the appraiser to call the listing agent. But if you represent the buyer, the best advice I could give you is tell your borrower, when they're meeting with the loan officer at application, to stress that they want you, the buyer's agent, to be listed as the contact, so that when the order gets placed and goes to the appraiser, you want that appraiser to look and see that your name's on there and you're the person they should be calling. So I want to answer more questions for you, but I do want to spend a minute and just kind of go into what I think belongs in the package that I'm hoping after today all of you prepare and bring with you to give to the appraiser. Okay. The first thing we talked about, that whole multiple offers, the number of showings, the number of offers, copies of the offers. Again, we talked about it earlier. That's critically important. I think in a time when things are going up and there's tons of demand for a limited number of listings, I think that's kind of a critical component. Another thing I would bring is a copy of the purchase contract. In pretty much every case, the appraiser is going to get a copy of that purchase agreement from the lender. But here's the problem. Every so often, either the appraiser doesn't get or the appraiser misses the final counteroffer. So the appraiser thinks we're in escrow at $450,000, missed counteroffer number 4, where we're in escrow at $452,000. The appraiser magically comes in at $450,000, and the deal's now at risk. The deal's now at risk because we, as the appraisal management company, need to go back to the appraiser and say, hey, you missed the counter. And they'll always change the sales price to $452, but often they won't change their value from $450 to $452. So your transaction's at risk. So please bring a copy of the purchase contract. I would attach the final counteroffer on top, and I would highlight the sales price. Okay, I don't want you to have a deal at risk because the appraiser didn't get the right information. Okay, so those are the first 2 things I would put in the package. The next 2 documents are documents that you as the realtor would need to prepare. And I fully understand in some cases you're kind of at the mercy of the records kept by the seller. First document is I would put together an upgrade list. Give me a list of all the things that maybe make this house better than most. A lot of appraisers will include that list right in the appraisal. The truth is, it helps me tell my story. That's what I'm doing. I'm telling a story to an underwriter who might not know this neighborhood, who's never seen this house. And part of that story is, what are the features that make this house better? And if I have it, I'm hopefully at the inspection, I'm going to find most of these myself. But if you've got a 19 SEER air conditioning unit, I won't see that. I won't catch that. If you have extra insulation in the attic, I probably am not going to see that, which means I'm not going to make note of it. So give me a list of upgrades. If you have no upgrades, if you've got vinyl floors and mini blinds, you can skip this step. I can figure out that you have no upgrades. The next document that's really helpful to me is a chronological list of improvements that have been made to the house over a certain period of time. And you have to decide how far back you can go and feel comfortable. But what I like to see is in 2019, they replaced an air conditioning unit and put new carpet in the bedrooms, and this is how much it cost. In 2017, new roof, $8,000. In 2016, they remodeled their kitchen, including the cabinets, the countertops, the appliances. It's really helpful to me. Again, it's helping tell the story. It kind of sometimes makes a compelling argument to make condition adjustments along with upgrade adjustments. And there's also, without going into too great a detail, kitchen and bathroom upgrades and updates is extra important because there's a place on my form, you don't see it, but when I click a certain box, a window pops up and it says, have the kitchen been updated or remodeled? Have the bathrooms been updated and remodeled? And if so, what time frame? Within a year, 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, time frame unknown. So you giving me a chronological list of improvements that have been made helps me figure that out and answer that question. And again, I think it'll help. If you're helping the appraiser, I think the appraiser is more apt to help you too. The last thing are comps. I am a big believer. This is your chance to give me input, insight that you think is helpful to whatever conclusion of value you're hoping that I'll come up with. I would bring between 3 and 10 comps. You'll never see an appraisal with less than 3 comps on there, so I wouldn't bring less than 3. At some point, I kind of lose interest, and I'm going to say 10 is that number for today. Don't ignore listings and pendings. Most appraisals will have at least 1 listing or pending sale. So I would consider including at least 1 of those in your comps with more of a focus on the closings. And then I think the format that's most helpful to me is print the 1-page plano and maybe put some notes in the top right corner. I don't need the picture pages. I'll look at my own pictures. I don't really like those. I think you guys have RPR reports. I don't really look at those. But just give me the 1-pagers and then any insight you have. Maybe you were in one of these comps and the sellers were smokers and the house smelled terrible all the time. I have yet to see a realtor put that on the MLS comments, so I won't find that out if you don't tell me. So I think that's the effective package for me. And it will enhance the interaction you and I have at the inspection. And I think it'll lead to more often a positive result. So that's kind of my spiel, Kelly, but I'm happy to answer more questions if you have them.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a lot of information. Katie wants to know the best way to go about appraising land.
So vacant land's tricky. It's tricky because there's too many appraisers who don't understand the nuances of vacant land. I have seen appraisers say it's all about site size, and that's it. It's all about lot size. Not true at all. And in fact, that's one of the most nuanced things about appraising is you might have 2 lots. One of them is an acre and one of them's 4 acres. And you would think, okay, does the 4-acre lot have 4 times the value of a 1-acre lot? Probably not. And it also really depends. It really depends on the utility. If you've got a 1-acre lot in Silverleaf and a 4-acre lot in Silverleaf, probably most of that 4-acre lot is not usable. It's NAOS area or hillside or something, and really has super limited contributory value. I find that it's often more about like view corridor, which way is the rear lot oriented. There's just a lot of nuances. And so that would be a scenario that you really, really want to make sure that that appraiser who's calling you has a high comfort level with how to appraise vacant land. The good news as an appraiser is all the other variables are out. Fireplaces, garages, covered patios, pools, those become a non-factor, but sometimes the things that are important about a vacant lot are harder to find. Like it's harder to find what the building envelope is on a lot. So it makes it harder. The form's different. I hope I answered the question.
Hopefully, yes. How do you appraise value a basement home in a neighborhood that rarely sees basements, and how do you appraise and value single level homes when all the comps are 2-story?
Yeah, so more good questions. So the basements are tricky. They're harder appraisals. And this conversation, you can interchange finished basements with detached guest houses, because the appraiser is likely to handle those the same way. And what I'm talking about is not walkout lower levels where you're on a highly sloped lot. What I'm talking about is like a David Weekley home where it's 3,000 square feet on the main level and 1,500 square foot in the basement. To you, that's a 4,500 square foot home. To the appraiser, it's a 3,000 square foot above grade and a 1,500 square foot basement. And here's the difference. Here's the nuances of appraising basement homes. The first goal as an appraiser is, let me find as many basement home comps as I can, okay? Sometimes that means expanding my search in terms of square footage or how far back I'm gonna go closing wise, or distance, because basement homes are really important to my process when I'm appraising a basement home. But here's the nuance. When I'm done with all my basement comps and I still need more, I'm not looking for 4,500 square foot homes. I'm looking for 3,000 square foot homes, because I'm not including the basement in my square footage. I'm adjusting the basement separately at a lower price per square foot figure probably. So be aware of that. And so if it's 3,000 above and 1,500 below, and you're bringing me all 4,500 square foot comps all above grade, most of those probably won't be usable to the appraiser. First, look for basement comps. And then when you can't find any more, look for houses that match our above grade living area figure, okay? And again, same with guest houses. A detached guest house, I understand you probably will include that in your square footage, but the appraiser won't. And so just as with a basement, I'm gonna look for other detached guest house comps, but when I'm focused, when I can't find any more and I still need more comps in my grid, I'm gonna try and match the main home square footage, not the guest house, not the basement. The other question, single levels versus 2 stories. My ideal comp when I'm appraising a 1-story is to find other 1-story comps. It doesn't mean that I will only use 1-story comps, but that's going to be one of the searches that I focus on, is give me the best 1-stories. And then if I have to use a 2-story comp, the last adjustment that I will make is the design adjustment, because I really want to see in this neighborhood, what is the premium people pay for a single level versus a 2-story. There's usually a premium for a single level versus a 2-story. Every so often I hit kind of a nuanced neighborhood where, because the 2nd story has more dramatic views, maybe it offsets the fact that people would prefer single levels. So it doesn't mean I won't use a 2-story when I'm appraising a 1-story, but it does mean that my first focus is going to be, let me use the best 1-story comps.
Perfect. All right. Ready? What about when the inspection period results in, say, a $10,000 credit to the buyer, or the reverse, when a lot of furniture conveys at no value, but the price is adjusted upwards $10,000 during inspection? Should this be reported to the appraiser, and will it affect the appraisal?
Yeah, so on the subject, when we're appraising that house, I don't particularly care if personal property is included in the transaction, because I'm going to give it no value. It's potentially an excuse for me. If it's selling for $500,000 and it's totally selling with all the furniture inside, and my comps say it's worth $480,000, part of my conclusion might be this may be artificially above market levels because personal property has been included. But otherwise, there's no impact at all on that, on the personal property, because my value shouldn't include any personal property. So, and again, if you want to disclose it in your listing after it closes for all the other appraisers, that's up to you. But if you don't disclose it, an appraiser will probably use it at the higher contract price. And that's certainly good for comps for the next house that's being appraised in that neighborhood. I hope I answered the question. I didn't really understand the concessions part in this case. Other than, I will say this, it's going to sound unfair, but if the subject sold with 3% seller concessions and comp 1 sold with 3% seller concessions, the short version of this, what I'd like you to understand, is that there is a pretty good chance that the appraiser is going to make a downward adjustment to that comp for the concessions. So let's just use round numbers. Let's say comp 1 sold with $5,000 and seller paid closing costs. a lot of appraisers will make a minus $5,000 adjustment to that comp because they're saying, hey, we think that sales price was inflated because it included $5,000 in seller concessions. Where it might seem unfair is, well, what if the subject sold with $5,000 in seller concessions? That doesn't matter because the appraiser is not looking at that contract and applying those adjustments to the comps. We're only making adjustment to the comps, not the subject.
Okay. Try to squeeze these in real quick. I have a listing coming up that should be around 750,000 price range that backs to a main street, but there aren't any comps since May that back to main streets. Should I prioritize finding comps that back to main streets, even if they're older, or comp it with recent sales and just try to err on the lower side because of the street?
Well, you should do both. I mean, I think that every good appraisal should have the most recent relevant comps in there. So I certainly don't want to discourage you from looking for really recent stuff, especially June, July, and August after what we've been going through over the last 6 months. That said, you shouldn't, it would be a really rare circumstance where an appraiser completed an appraisal backing a busy street where they didn't at least find one comp backing a busy street. I should say it differently. Good appraisers should not finish appraisals without trying really hard to find a comp on a busy street. So there's different forms of external obsolescence. That's what we're talking about, where the location is negative to the marketability of the home. Backing a busy street is important. You could be on a half-mile connector route. That might be lesser external obsolescence. You could back power lines. You could back commercial use. You can face a school that gets heavy traffic during school hours. So you can be a little creative in trying to find other houses that have some negative locational aspects. If none of those work before submitting an appraisal without other comps with negative aspects, I would go further in distance. And I fully understand I might be going to a less similar neighborhood, but that's how important it is for me to try and figure out what the dollar amount is associated with the market reaction to backing a busy street. So you're on the right track. Make it a focus and make sure that you, one of the things you can do is you can go into monsoon and just start looking at the maps on monsoon and just kind of focus on going, maybe it's your street, maybe it's a different busy street. You should probably be able to find something in most cases.
Perfect. Well, I'm just going to summarize by saying I'm going to send out an email follow-up to everybody, maybe even do a little survey to see how we did. And I'll include your contact information, right, Jay? So any questions you may have missed, they can ask you. And another thank you to Krisha. I know she popped off the call, had to go somewhere else, but thank you to her for help putting this together. And thank you, Jay.
My pleasure. Happy to be affiliated with you guys. And anything I can ever do to help you guys do your job better, please let me know.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.